So on behalf of University of Chicago Center in India, a very warm welcome to all of you. I am Lenny Chaudhary, the Executive Director of the Center, and it's my proud privilege to welcome all of you here. I know we have a very important day ahead of several lectures by 3 distinguished speakers and a power-packed panel. So I don't want to stand between you and the session, but I'll take this opportunity to talk about the center a little bit, especially for those of you who have joined us for the first time. So the center in Delhi was established in 2014 and serves as a base for research, academic exchange, academic discussions like this, and many more things between scholars from University of Chicago, India, and around the world. It builds on the rich history and tradition of academic collaboration between Chicago and India and has been facilitating path-breaking work in the areas of liberal arts and humanities, public health, medicine, science, and engineering. As University of Chicago's one of the 6 global centers, the center acts as a platform for University of Chicago professors, research scholars, alumni, and students to engage with each other and their collaborators here across multiple disciplines and areas. And the University of Chicago takes special interest in making this possible. As a global research university, South Asia is a major focus for the university. So the university makes it possible through grants and administrative support for faculty to explore new areas of research and academic collaboration amongst their counterparts here in this region. The center in Delhi provides the administrative and operational support to facilitate those academic engagements. So we've been fortunate that in the last 12 years, we have been able to facilitate more than 200 faculty and research scholar-driven programs. We've forged more than 250 collaborations, hosted more than 1,400 academic engagements and programs such as this, and invited more than 60,000 scholars from across the world to participate in some of these meetings. The University of Chicago Center in Delhi also hosts a couple of University of Chicago-led and inspired research and policy engagement programs. One of them is the Development Innovation Lab, DIL, which was founded by Nobel laureate Professor Michael Kremer, which uses the tools of economics to do research and design innovations which are ready to be scaled up and which can impact the lives of millions of people in low and middle income countries, works in India. In DIL, my colleagues, the research scholars, engage with governments, with state governments and government at the center, conduct evaluations and randomized controlled trials in the areas of education, water, and agriculture to support the government's initiatives and government's programs. In fact, 2 days ago, we signed an MOU with the government to scale up our AI-based weather forecasting. In fact, we started with 90 lakh farmers, and this year, the AI-based weather forecasting, that is our monsoon forecasts, will go to more than 5 crore farmers. Our other program is EPIC India, which is part of University of Chicago's Energy Policy Institute and is affiliated to the Institute of Climate and Sustainable Growth, also operates from here. At EPIC India, the research scholars interact with the government and industry partners to do path-breaking work in the areas of energy and environment. They work on climate and health, pollution, transport, and several other areas. In fact, EPIC has been instrumental in bringing many new initiatives to India. Some of them are, one of the major ones I wanted to talk about is the emission trading system. So the emission market, which was demonstrated in Gujarat, was piloted in Gujarat, is now being scaled up across multiple states in India. EPIC is also doing interesting work in the areas of transport, urbanization, waste management, and others. The other program which the center supports is the International Innovation Corps, which is again a social impact-based fellowship program. So every year we select a group of young fellows who work with the government partners, trying and designing new programs, enabling and helping the government to strengthen its existing programs in the areas of nutrition, technology, health, and several others. Amongst our newer programs is the Data Policy Innovation Center, which is a unique collaboration between a state government and the University of Chicago, which supports the government by conducting advanced data analytics and AI, by using AI tools to strengthen government's decision-making, program design, and program implementation. And all this has been possible because of the support that we have received from our government partners, our institutional partners, our donors, and a strong alumni and student base that University of Chicago has in India. We've been very fortunate to have these rich academic engagements, and we are very hopeful that today's discussion and the symposium may lead to, you never know, it may lead to an interesting program like the ones I mentioned earlier. So once again, a very, very warm welcome to all of you. And like you, I'm also looking forward to an engaging day of lectures, discussions. There'll be enough opportunity to interact with each other and ask questions. So with this, I would like to start today's proceedings and call upon our first speaker, Mr. Somik V. Lall. Somik is from the World Bank, and he will be speaking on the topic Disciplining Incumbents, Restoring Competition and Market Dynamism. So Somik will give a talk, and after that we will have an opportunity to ask questions to Somik. Thank you so much, Somik.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. I'm really glad to be here. And Lenny, thank you very much for that really nice introduction. I'm not speaking today on behalf of the World Bank, but with Ufuk Akçit and I, we have a program called the Growth Academy, where we take ideas facing developing economies and questions and try to find relevant intellectual insights, but also relevant policy options. So my main connection with the University of Chicago is that I'm a parent of a rising third-year student. And over the last 3 years, I've learned two things. There are these two myths about the University of Chicago. One of them is true and one of them is false. The first one is that this is the place where all fun goes to die. And that is false. Second is there is no idea that's as controversial as you want that cannot be asked. You can ask anything, and that is true. So in that spirit, I'd like to kind of have this conversation with you about disciplining incumbency. So take a look at this road, and somewhere in southern Italy, there's this road. And this is a road that was built by hand. It was built with large stones and was fitted carefully, and it runs in absolutely straight lines. And it's a line from here to there. And here is where the wheels of Roman chariots used to run from. And this road is 2,000 years old, and it's still in use. The man who ordered the building of this road controlled more power than any other person in human history. He had the largest army in the world. He had the wealth of Egypt, its grain, its gold, its tax. And he had revenues that flowed directly to him. He had the loyalty of a generation of soldiers and the political legitimacy of huge political legitimacy. And what he did was all of that. Was he chose to build roads, laws, institutions, and a peace that lasted 2 centuries. He had a lot of capital that he had accumulated, human, physical, financial, and he invested that in something that outlasted him by 2,000 years. Folks, his name was Augustus. And he is the person I want to argue is the most instructive incumbent in the history of humankind. I'm not saying this guy was good, and not because he was virtuous, because his story contains elements both of good and bad I want you to hear. The first warning is about what unchecked incumbency looks like. Because Augustus, he didn't simply build, he used his power to capture every institution around him. He monopolized Egypt's grain supply, making sure Rome food security came from his personal province. He reformed the currency, giving himself control over the resources. He restructured the Senate, purging it and refilling it with supporters, and then ensured that no legislation passed without his approval. He controlled appointments to every significant military position. He didn't storm the institutions of the Republic. He became the institutions. And all these folks in the economy, they owed their loyalty to him personally, and the economy flowed through him. And the Senate started performing deliberations that were no longer warranted. So this is government capture at its most refined. But the reason I'm telling you all this is it's not so different today when ESCOM does to South Africa, or what Carlos Slim has done in Mexico's telecom sector. And these are two names you should look up, ESCOM and Carlos Slim. And they control the very infrastructure, and because of that, you control everything that runs on it. The second warning is about discipline. What Augustus understood is that power exercised too nakedly pretty much destroys itself. And we look at Caesar, Caesar behaved like a king, and he was assassinated for it. So what Augustus did, he refused the title of a dictator, he dressed simply, he performed deference to the Senate, and maintained the forms of the Republic even as he hollowed their substance. His discipline was not a virtue, it was survival. He really knew that the moment the Roman elite stopped tolerating him, he was finished. That's what kept him in check, the pressure of doing things because someone else is there to take your position. And when his successors abandoned that discipline, the system collapsed. The lesson is pretty clear. Without external constraints, an incumbent's self-restraint eventually dissipates. That's why competition policy matters in the modern day. The incumbent will not discipline itself. Someone else has to hold the line. And today, the roads that Augustus built, they're pretty much still with us. If you drive through France today, or England or Spain, if you follow the motorway between these cities, we are still following Augustus's footsteps. The towns that grew around these places were small towns. And 2,000 years of history has not been enough to escape them. Economists, and many of you in this room are economists, you will call this part dependence. But I'll call it incumbency, a term that's more commonly used by political scientists. Friends, you all right? So path dependency is incumbency over time. And this, friends, is the central challenge facing the 6 billion people who live in middle-income countries. India is a lower middle-income country. Countries that have grown, they've accumulated real talent, real capital, and capabilities, have ambition, like India has, of becoming Viksit Bharat by 2047, but just cannot take the final steps to reach that place. To be sure, I'm not here to say that we should tear down the incumbents. The goal is not to destroy incumbency. It is to ensure that what gets built serves more than just the people who built it. And that's the spine of everything I want to say today. Discipline. We need to be purposeful. We need to be policy-driven and politically brave. And that's how the middle income trap will get broken. So right now, there are about 108 countries, home to about 6 billion people who find themselves in this paradox. These are countries like India that are not poor. They've moved hundreds of millions of people out of poverty. They build roads, they build ports, they build infrastructure, and high-class global universities. They're firms who have experienced managers. They have skilled workers and access to capital. But by any historical measure, they should be pretty well positioned to grow into developed economies. And yet, growth is stalling. Productivity is plateauing. The gap between them and the high-income countries is not disappearing. And folks, here's the kind of really concerning slide. Only 34 economies have moved from being middle income to becoming high income in the past 34 years. Think about it, one country per year. That's a really low number. And most economies hit two roadblocks. I've shown one of them here. First is the roadblock when countries reach about $4,500 per capita. For reference, India is about $2,700 per capita. And that's the threshold that the World Bank calls upper middle income countries. And the next that I show in the chart is $8,000 per capita. That's about halfway to becoming a high income country. And when we think about the conventional explanations, they're pretty incomplete. Not enough investment. But middle income countries have invested. They have enough technology. Not enough education, but enrollment rates have risen in most middle income countries. And the numbers here are really stark. When I was a kid growing up in India, middle income countries were about 6% per capita incomes of the US. Today, if we exclude China and you follow that line in orange, we're still 6%. 40 years, no progress, right? So in fact, if the standard reason is capital accumulation, countries need more capital. If capital accumulation were enough, work in middle-income countries would be 75% rewarding as the United States, not 20%. So something else is going on. And I want to introduce you to what's going on. I call that the incumbent. Think about it as a firm, a business that's been around for the longest. It employs the most people in your economy, and it has the deepest relationship with government, right? These firms hold human capital, they got physical capital, financial capital. And in many middle-income countries, think about wherever, the incumbent in many ways is the economy. And they're also the very reason why the economy and the growth has stopped. When incumbents preserve the status quo, their economies get stuck in the middle income trap. But folks, around here, those who work on policy, the first gut reaction you have is to vilify these incumbents. You have to resist the temptation to vilify them. That would be too easy. To understand why you need to resist it, I want to take you through a little bit of an intellectual journey through the economics of creative destruction. And Ufuk Akçit, who's sitting here, is one of the most influential people in shaping the economics of creative destruction. And I have to tell you, this is one of the most powerful ideas in economics. So, the basic idea about creative destruction is that the economy holds in balance these forces of creation, preservation, and destruction. This audience probably has heard about these three forces in other contexts. But what's happening when incumbents are strong, they hold together the status quo and the forces of preservation expand. The forces of creation are there, but there is no destruction in the economy. Again, in our cultural sense, there's a lot written about it, right? But in the way I want to tell you is Joseph Schumpeter, when writing in 1942, gave us one of the most evocative phrases on creative destruction. Progress does not come from stability. It comes from disruption. Entrepreneurs with new ideas sweep away the old, and the economy climbs higher. In Schumpeter's world, if you see, the incumbent is always the loser. History is written by the entrant. But what did Schumpeter really say in terms of creative destruction? That both the words creation and destruction matter equally. But all of you know, creation is the glamorous half. Entrepreneur with the new idea, the startup that disrupts the market, the technology that rewrites the rules. But destruction is what's necessary. The unproductive firm that needs to exit the market, the bad practice that needs to be displaced, and the capital and labor locked into unproductive use that's reused in better senses. And most policy discussion focuses largely on fostering creation. Almost none of it focuses on destruction. And undisciplined incumbency attacks both sides. It does not allow productive firms from growing and unproductive firms from going out. Ufuk, in fact, has done a lot of work on this. So this gale of creative destruction that Schumpeter talked about cannot blow if the windows have been shut from both sides, right? So someone needs to open it. But there's another view to it. This is Philippe Aghion and Peter Howitt, and they showed that the entrant in the economy is the hero. In 2025, both Philippe Aghion and Peter Howitt received Nobel Prizes for the work they've developed on ideas of technology and creative destruction, largely in a paper they published in 1992. They gave Schumpeter's ideas mathematical form. And new entrants innovate, they displace incumbents, and drive growth. And the incumbent produces existing goods unless they're replaced. But you know what these two Nobel winners have done? They have given policy a wrong dimension. They have said the entrant is good, the incumbent is bad. So what do you think we do? We coddle small firms. Small and young are being confused. So there are all these policies around the world that helps young firms, but actually they're helping small firms stay small. And they are vilifying large firms. So you see all these stories that if your firm is growing, the tax inspector comes to visit you. That's pretty much an application or a misguided application of some of these ideas in creative destruction. But then comes to the rescue is Ufuk and Bill Kerr. And they really had the incumbents' redemption. And when Ufuk and Bill Kerr wrote this paper in 2018, they complicated the picture. And I think, Ufuk, you should have been part of that Nobel citation. And they found that large established firms, I'm serious about that, they really contribute to growth and R&D and innovation. They invest in research. They can scale production. They diffuse technology throughout the economy. So in fact, the entrant is not the only hero. The incumbent can be one too. So this is where 80 years of economics takes us, right? If you were Schumpeter, the entrant destroy incumbents. Destruction is driving progress. In another formal version, entrants are heroes and incumbents are passive losers. But what I want you to focus on is the one on the right. that incumbents can innovate too. And both incumbents and entrants can drive growth. Now, if you start thinking about it and you look at policies around the world, most of them are getting it wrong. So I want to kind of tell you what this kind of incumbency looks like. First, in a good sense, and second, in a bad sense. This is a company that's Samsung. And Samsung, everyone's heard of Samsung? Hands up for people who are using a Samsung device? Probably a lot of you, right? But Samsung did not start off as an electronics company. They were a noodle maker. And over time, they got into different industries. They started licensing technology from Japan and using that technical knowledge to build products, build capabilities, and compete with the Japanese in the same Asian markets. Then, as the returns from kind of taking Japanese technologies reduced, they sort of moved to much more to higher tech products. But in each one, Samsung competed in global markets. For Korean firms selling only to Korea, there was no value. It's a small market. And the external market disciplined them. And that's the kind of story how an incumbent facing global market competition and pressure invests in itself, and it can kind of amplify progress. The other picture is how incumbency is like a monopoly protecting the status quo. Who's heard of Carlos Slim? Okay, so about 15 years ago, Carlos Slim was one of the richest men in the world. How did he become rich? By innovating? Probably not. That's when Mexico's telecom utility moved from being a public monopoly to becoming a private monopoly. And Carlos Slim kind of held not only the infrastructure of all the related companies and made sure competition was not allowed to enter the market. So what Slim did was very different from what Samsung did. Samsung thrived with competition. Slim killed the competition to capture the market, but stymie progress. So you see, an incumbent can do good things, and an incumbent can do bad things, right? So how does this play out, right? Let me tell you about two examples, and about business dynamism and about talent. So the amazing thing, and I hope you recognize the flags, the amazing thing about economies that do well, and Ufuk's done a lot of work on this, is this invisible engine where creative destruction just goes on at rapid speed. The left number, 7x, that's a number from America. So if you're a firm in America and you survive for 40 years, you're going to be 7 times the size at which you were born. That's pretty healthy, right? That means you're facing competition, you're beating out competition, you're taking the resources, and you're growing. So this is what it's called often up or out, right? You take the resources that's being available to you, you're productive, you're growing. But if you look at our country, India, and you look at Mexico, the numbers are not 7x, they're 2x. That means there are two things that's happening. A firm born in India or Mexico, after 40 years, is less than twice the size at which it was born. This is called flat and stay. Yes, you're going pretty old, but you aren't growing. That's not a good sign of development. And what's happening is two things. One, it's very hard for productive firms to expand, and it's very difficult for unproductive firms to exit. So remember that force of destruction, that's completely thrown out of the picture, right? So again, the American business dynamism is all about competition for the market, in the market. Competing firms with good technology can grow. In most emerging economies, the forces of preservation are so strong that it becomes really difficult for growth to take place. Worse than that, if you're not doing well, you can't leave the market. You're stuck. You're in a zombie world, right? So what we also find that the market gets blocked when the state supports its own actors. And research that we've been doing for a report that the World Bank produces every year, in 2024, the World Development Report that we produced was on development in middle-income countries. And we found that when the size of the state increases and doubles up, there's about between 5 and 35% reduction in business entry. So it's not only the state having rules that slows down competition, but the state becomes an active participant, blocking out other players. So, how do you fix it? One example is a crisis. In 1997, there was a crisis where Korean firms, a lot of the Korean chaeballs, who's heard of a chaebol? Great. So you know these are kind of family conglomerates that have deep ties to government, and they've been beneficiaries of great government subsidies for many years, right? So they're connected firms. Many of them kind of had written rules, had influential access to markets, and things turned south in 1997. At that time, what happened is that 15 of the 30 largest chaebols went belly up. They went bankrupt. What the government did was pretty instructive. Because there was this tight link between the chaebols and the government, it was very hard in good times to displace these incumbent firms. But in terms of bailouts, the Korean government decided, we're not going to do that anymore. And they let some of these failing companies fail. Protections were removed. You probably have never heard of a company called Daewoo. But in the oh, you did. But now you never see them, right? But they were really dominant up to in the 1990s. This was not an easy process. This was a painful process, but it's a restorative process. Disruption is good for growth. What happened then, after that, in the Korean economy was this huge new wave of growth. New ICT sector firms filled the space that was left by the chaebols, and that's when a lot of the new innovations took place. Productivity growth continued for 2 more decades, and finally, creative destruction was doing the job it's supposed to do, enhance productivity and growth. So when you come to middle-income countries, there's another problem. We have a talent exclusion problem. In most middle-income countries, let me see, half of you in the room are probably women, and women are grossly underrepresented in the economy. And they're on 2 margins. One, in terms of women's participation in the labor force, but what's even worse is the allocation of women's talent to tasks that really matter. And here, the one incumbent I'm talking about, someone looks like me, a man, right? And so these are historical norms and practices that's basically keeping women out of the workforce. So what we have found, and this is research from a neighboring country, that 70% of women, of medical school graduates in Pakistan are women, but only 23% practice medicine. Think about the numbers. 70% of all medical graduates are women, and only 23% practice. The gap is a system that does not reward the skills of women. And what the research has shown is a degree in medicine makes the woman a more valued bride and doesn't make her a practicing doctor. So a lot of work has recently shown in countries like India, the lack of women's participation in the labor force is reducing GDP by about 5 to 15%. That's a big number. So what does it take to discipline incumbency? And I'm going to take 5 more minutes, Lenny. Thank you. The first is to have competition policy with teeth. If you look around the world, there are lots of competition agencies who don't have real power or real credibility. So there are all these examples of countries erecting competition agencies, but nothing really changes. But Mexico provides a really good example of developing competition agencies that really could do the job. And they had antitrust enforcement, and after these kind of policies were enforced, you had growth of wages and growth of productivity. And this did not come from destroying incumbents. This came from making the incumbents compete, and these were competition agencies that were independent, but not reporting to different lines of the government. They were well funded, and they were insulated from political pressure. So while we were doing a lot of research, we talked to heads of competition agencies in Latin America. And it was almost surreal to hear stories of why the heads of competition agencies couldn't do things. Because people who were in power knew the families of the families who could kind of influence political decisions. So things were really complicated. But this is not only a luxury to have competition agencies in wealthy countries. This is a precondition for growth. Second, and Marcin, where are you? This is what your country did, right? It's reformed its own incumbents. And Marcin is from Poland. He's written an amazing book about Poland's reforms. I highly recommend it. And what Poland did in terms of reforms is before the transition to the private sector happened, they kind of cut a lot of the subsidies to state-owned enterprises. And they, as Poland integrated to the European Union, they adopted new institutions and new regulations. They also opened up the economy to import competition. Result, today Poland moved from one of being a poor middle-income country to one of the richest countries in Europe. So that's a great story. The same thing in Korea. The state-owned enterprises and the connected firms, the protections to them were removed, the budget constraints were hardened, and they were forced to compete. Finally, I want to talk about something that comes from theory. It's about removing these false protections and rewarding merit. And Ufuk's going to talk a lot about it. But in markets, there's this assumption, the small is beautiful, large is bad. And what we end up doing is protecting smallness, not small firms, and we end up keeping a system that's systematically unproductive. So of every policy that you see, you should ask a question. Am I rewarding merit? That means my potential to grow, or am I rewarding incumbency that I am in the market? The second is in talent. And a lot of research that we've been doing at the World Bank this time shows that it's a lot of constraints in the marketplace and the workplace that we call demand-side constraints that need legal reforms, but also issues about supply-side issues may require better solutions. Women's safety in the workplace, getting to work and having daycare, those matter. And there's a lot of research in India documenting these impacts. For any of you in the room who thinks this is charity, think again. These are really investments to unlock the creative potential of your economy. You can't really run a middle-income economy when 50% of your workforce and your talent is grossly underutilized, right? So my hope is that we talk about incumbency very differently. Incumbents are an important part of an economy. They don't need to be vilified, they need to be disciplined. But what's really important is to balance these forces of creation, preservation, and destruction. Because we all love to be creative, but we don't see ways to soften the preservation problem, and we don't often want to think about ways of destroying old practices, destroying ideas that are kind of archaic, as well as firms and businesses who should be exiting the market. So folks, thank you very much for your time. I'm happy to take any questions that you have. Yes. Introduce yourself while you ask a question.
Yeah, hi, good afternoon. Thanks for the talk. I am Binay Gupta. I run a strategic advisory, Geosynthesis. We focus on geopolitics and geoeconomics. In your view, what makes Mexico and Poland sort of the outliers in the basket of low-income, middle-income countries that help them kind of shift from this low middle income to middle income in the context of competition reform, letting the incumbents be disrupted, the talk you gave, as opposed to countries like India, Indonesia, and so many other countries? Your study showed that one country in the last 34 years every year has made that shift. So what makes these two unique political economies?
Great question. So if you think about transition to high-income countries, there are three types, right? Some who can be lucky, that I would say is Marcin's country, that had the historical benefit of moving from a planned economy to joining the European Union. So they got a lot of incentives, they got a lot of institutional reforms, and when these institutional reforms were put in place, they had to discipline the incumbents. So what I loved about the Polish story was that the union leaders who were kind of heading these kinds of moving out of planned economy, they had their own, favorite shipyards. But even there, they enforced discipline. So they started enforcing discipline in a hope that they're going to join the European Union and the big rewards that came from it. So I call these lucky countries. Second are countries that are plucky, and they are countries like Korea. They didn't have much going on. They made sure they connected with the rest of the world. And they took the ideas in the rest of the world to the local economies and diffused them. But the thing is that the local companies, even though locally protected, had to compete in global markets. So they were really, disciplined. The third group of countries are lucky countries. These are guys who discovered natural resources. And they may look like high-income countries in terms of GDP per capita, but the structures probably are much weaker. So I group these into these three groups of countries, right? But I think the instructions for countries like India, who, is the Korean one, which is the plucky countries. Do the right reforms, do the kind of investment mixes, do the policy mixes to kind of amplify entry, exit, growth. Those are probably much better. Next question. I don't know who's saying who's next. Okay, I'm just going to go here, all right? So, or whoever, right? So.
Thank you. Great talk, very insightful. My name is Amit Agnihotri. I run Indian Management Conclave, which is an annual convention of all the business schools in the country, the IIMs, ISB, etc. One of the sub-themes of the session today is AI. I was wondering how AI comes into the picture. It appears to be a great force. So have you and your colleagues thought about the potential role of AI as a force which can disrupt the incumbents, bring in the new players, both at a national level, because I think it's becoming sovereign in discussions, and of course at the industry level?
Great question. We're going to talk a lot about AI in the panel, but there's a debate about incumbents versus entrants across the AI stack, right? So if you think about what Ufuk would say, he would say entrants really matter because they come with new ideas. But if you look at users of products, they like to go with the big players because they always expect updates. So I think that's the tension that needs about who's a disruptor versus who provides steady services, right? And if you look at the AI stack, there are applications, there are large language models, there's infrastructure, include computing, then there's the hardware, and then critical minerals. Each one of them has a different dynamic of incumbents versus entrants. Take the last one, about critical minerals. Most of the critical minerals needed for all these data centers and others are concentrated in a few countries. So the geopolitical concerns become very important. Now, on the very other end of it, if you look at applications, there's a huge market for them, right? But the problem is we may have too many applications without knowing which use case should be scaled up versus those that should be jettisoned. So I think we'll discuss all these in the panel.
Yeah, this is Manish Gupta. Thanks for a great talk.
Hi, Manish. Good to meet you.
Good to meet you. So I mean, it was very clear, right, that for a company, it's very important for them to compete rather than whatever, just survive because of government support. But does government support matter at an early stage? In some sense, like US and China, right? They've benefited a lot from governments in strong investments in research, in the university ecosystem, which led to the birth of many of these companies, right? And sometimes at early stages, right, even companies like Tesla and so on, they enjoyed a lot of government support that helped them reach a certain level. So what's your view about government support for entrants?
Great question. The answer is for underprovided public goods like research or knowledge, there is a role for government. But the thing is, when you come to scaling up, who should be scaling up? It's the entrepreneur who has good ideas and can connect it with the market test who should scale up, not all of them. So in fact, folks, there's a new World Bank report on industrial policy that has come out. And after 30 years, the World Bank has new ideas on industrial policy. And one of them is the question Manish asked about where they are underprovided public goods. There is a real role for government to fill in those roles, public goods, and then have exit clauses that matter. Next question, please.
I think there's a question here.
Oh, see.
Hi, hi, Mr. Lall. Thank you for your presentation. I am Rohit Kumar, advocate on record, Supreme Court of India. So I'm not an economist, so I would like to understand from the example, you use a phrase in which you said that incumbents can innovate, but a new entrants can also, contribute. Can you give some example from India on this?
I won't have a local example, but I'll tell you how. So some of the largest, and Ufuk's research really talks about that. Some of the largest companies in the world have huge capabilities in terms of research and development. So they can spend a lot of resources coming up with new ideas, new products, new designs. On the other hand, it could be an entrant who is kind of a small inventor who could come up with a disruptive idea. In the traditional ways of thinking, it was that the little or the new entrant was the only one who came up with a new product or a new idea. The incumbent was holding the status quo. And what Ufuk's work shows is that's not correct. But we can get to examples later. I don't have an Indian example.
There's a question there. Yeah, go ahead.
Hi, I'm Nita Mehra. I teach economics at the Jawaharlal Nehru University. My question to you is about, the plucky countries. So those who are really striving to sort of go over to the other side. What do you think would be a good balance between imitation versus innovation?
Sorry, what was the first part?
The imitation
Great.
Versus innovation for actually sort of, going over the fence to the other side.
I love your question because the word I used is infusion. The reason is we often don't imitate others, right? We take the ideas and we adapt them to local circumstances. So the point I want to make is that if you're a really poor country, you need to do a lot of investment, but then the returns drop off. In the traditional models, you say, okay, I'm done with investment, I need to innovate. That's the wrong step. In the middle is this thing called infusion. That is taking technologies and ideas from the rest of the world and making sure your own businesses can use it. So see, these plucky countries need to do a lot of domestic policies as well as open up and connect to the rest of the world. That's why I find Korea to be so instructive, because Korea not only licensed technology, they sent their engineers to the shop floors of Japan to learn the know-how and use that with infusion. And even Manish, you said, can government help? They give them access to credit. And rather than having collateral, if you get a license, you get access to credit. So in fact, infusion takes you a long, long way. But many countries, like Brazil, don't like the word infusion. They, in fact, supported their firms to do homegrown innovations because they thought borrowing from America meant a lot of other ramifications. And they spectacularly failed, right? So I think infusion, or what you call imitation, is really the foundational stepping stone.
Thank you so much. I don't think we can take any
All
more
right, thank you very much,
questions.
Lenny.
Time for the next speaker. Somik is going to be around, so you can talk
absolutely.
to him.